I've always heard the Amish don't like to be photographed or videoed because they believe it's stealing their soul. Which...
Another myth out there.
Hi everybody, what's up? It's Kelly again. Welcome back to my channel, and I'm sitting here with a friend of mine. Doug, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Doug Madenford, fellow YouTuber.
And we're talking today about the Pennsylvania Dutch. So we're in Pennsylvania right now. I'm visiting my parents, and I had the opportunity to be able to talk to Doug about the Pennsylvania Dutch, which I feel like a lot of people are interested in, and a lot of you are probably interested in. So Doug, if you can talk to us a little bit about what the Pennsylvania Dutch means.
Absolutely. So when we say the term Pennsylvania Dutch, it's one umbrella term for our culture, which is made up of a lot of different groups underneath it. And of course, the one that's probably the most famous is the Amish, which I think we're going to discuss in depth today. But I want everybody to know that it's not just the Amish. So when you say Pennsylvania Dutch, you're also talking about groups like other religious groups like the Mennonites, the Old Order Mennonites, the Dunkards, the River Brethren, and then the other major two groups that fall underneath that would be what we call the non-sectarian Pennsylvania Dutch. Those would be people that aren't Amish or plain, like me. I'm not Amish, that settled in southeastern Pennsylvania in the 16 and 1700s from the Pfalz area of Germany, and that also came from that cultural background, not the same religious background, but the same cultural background and linguistic background. So they mainly were Lutheran and German Calvinists that came over as well. So that's Pennsylvania Dutch as a whole, but there are all these little groups underneath it. So I think people always mix that up. They think of here Pennsylvania Dutch, it's just the Amish, but it's not just the Amish. They're just one portion of that bigger group.
Okay.
So.
Can you talk to me a little bit about like what differentiates them? Like, first of all, how did they divide? Did they come over as a divided groups, or? So
yeah, the first groups that came over actually the very first group were Mennonites, who were being persecuted back in Europe in the 1600s. 1683 was the first group that came over and landed in Philadelphia and why Pennsylvania is a great story too. William Penn, the founder of our colony, was out of all of the original colonies here on the East Coast, Pennsylvania was the only one that pretty much said, we don't care what religion you are, we're tolerant, come on over. A lot of the other colonies didn't advertise that, and Penn specifically went to the Rhine Valley and said, hey, I got land for sale, anybody want to come over? So the group came over, the Mennonites. That Mennonite group was the first group that came over, and then quickly after that other groups came, like the Amish, who were also being persecuted quite heavily in Europe. And then the non-sectarians like the Lutherans and the other Protestant groups came not necessarily because of religious persecution, but because of just a better opportunity in life to own land, economic prosperity, just to get away out of the feudal system that was still there in Europe at the time. Okay.
So then they came over here, and how did they adapt to the way of life here?
Well, it was a clean slate. I mean, 1680s, 1690s, this was pretty much, make of it what you want. And the landscape and the geography of southeastern Pennsylvania was very similar to the region of Germany where they were coming from. So it almost felt like home. It looked like home. They were very easy to start agriculture, which is what most of them did. Clear the land and start growing. And then self-subsistence and self-sustaining lifestyle was what it did, what they did throughout that colonial era. So it was easy, and they were allowed to practice whatever religion they wanted, so they truly had a lot of autonomy and freedom from, definitely from what they were used to back in the old country.
Okay. So you touched a little bit about the region they came from. You said like the Pfalz area,
so
right?
the Rhineland-Palatinate, parts of Hessen, parts of present-day Baden-Württemberg, but that Rhine River Valley, and the Amish and the Mennonite weren't originally from that. They're traditionally Swiss. They started in Switzerland. That's where their religion started, but in Switzerland they were persecuted. A lot of them were burned. So they moved out of Switzerland up the Rhine River into the area of the Palatinate there, and they stayed there for about 1 or 2 generations, and then had the opportunity to come over here. But they were constantly being pushed.
Right.
And that's why those groups came over. And that's why the Amish and Mennonites speak a little bit different variation of our language because of the Swiss influence. And those of you that know German would know that Swiss German and regular German is different. So there are some differences. We can talk about that later, though.
Okay, wow. I had no idea that they originated from Switzerland. That is completely, wow, no idea. That's interesting. So I was living in the Mainz area, which is in Rhineland-Pfalz, and I'm very familiar with Hessen and so on. So Some of my viewers, in fact, are from that area as
Good.
well. So what people know about the Amish is that they don't use any electricity, that they're very plain. Can you speak a little bit about why they don't use electricity?
So I'm not by any standard an Amish expert, but I know some stuff, we'll just say that. But I can direct you guys to the real experts out there, and I can give you some links to share with your viewers. But every decision that the Amish make is based on their interpretation of their religion. Right. So the one thing we have to know is, yes, they're a culture, but they're a culture based on their religion. Anabaptist groups, they first off believe in adult baptism. That was one of the things that really got them in a lot of trouble in Europe when the church was created. So every decision they make is based off of the decisions that their group, because they settle into districts, and each district has a bishop that's elected by the people. Their pastors are not seminary trained. They're brought up within the church, and then they're elected to be leaders of the church. And the bishops have the ability to make decisions as to what their district is allowed. Because you can, when you just say Amish, that's a pretty broad stroke, because underneath that there are multiple groups. There are Old Order Amish, which are the strictest of all, no electricity, no zippers, nothing. I mean, they are really like living in the 1600s. But then there are more progressive and more liberal Amish groups that will allow certain things. Like if you own a business, you'll see some Amish that have cell phones, or their business will have electricity, but then their home won't. So it all depends, what group you're among and where you are. Here in Pennsylvania, we have all of those groups. We have Old Order, we have more progressive, we have more liberal, but then you can travel to Ohio or Wisconsin and find other groups that are, are Amish, but maybe they practice a little bit differently or are allowed different things. Because right now, here in Pennsylvania, it's becoming more and more popular to see Amish that are, they definitely won't drive cars, but it's been allowed for them to ride in somebody else's car for transportation purposes. They still have the horse and buggy, but if they need to run to the grocery store, they can call somebody up, and essentially it's like Amish taxi service right now. It's quite popular for non-Amish to make money, and then they'll drive the Amish to the grocery store, get the groceries, drive them back, but the Amish will never physically drive the car. So that's really changing, as the years go on, what they're being allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. But it all comes down to what their bishop or what their church leaders say in their district is allowed. There's different, rules for each group.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I grew up around the Amish, and I've noticed some different things. We were driving around Loganton, which is just only like 20 minutes away from here, and I saw like these telephone booths sort of things. They look like little sheds that were tucked away, and I actually saw an Amish man who was on the phone in the telephone booth, and I was confused, is he allowed to do that and so on. But I guess this is, as you're saying, they can adapt some of the rules, and especially to be able to, they have to be able to survive. They need to be able to make money. And
in this part of Pennsylvania, you're starting to see more and more of the younger Amish moving away from agriculture, because a lot of the land there's not an opportunity for them to have the land. So they're opening their own businesses, whether it's a carpentry business or landscaping or construction. And, to run a business in 2018, you need to be able to communicate with the outside world. So I think in that respect, that's where these bishops are saying, well, if you want to be successful, or if you want to have this business, you're going to have to be able to use a telephone, for example, or have a computer at your work to help you with whatever you need to do. But once they leave that business and get back into their home, then it's, it's like take that hat off and put the other hat back on. So I just think that's a change of the way the times are changing.
Right.
So.
Yeah, do you have any foresight on what you think it'll change, how much more they'll
Well,
progress?
The one thing for sure is that the Amish are the fastest growing minority population in the United States.
Wow.
Their population doubles every 20 years.
Wow.
But they have large families, and
Right.
it makes sense. So they're not going anywhere. The thing that I think we'll see the most is that we will see them spread out more. Right now, there are Amish throughout many states here in the United States and into Canada. There's some Amish settlements in South America as well. So as they continue to grow and the ability to get land becomes available, I think they will just continue moving and, increasing in population. So, years ago, if you wanted to see Amish, you had to come to Pennsylvania. Right. But that's not the case anymore. You can travel to Ohio, to Ontario, to Iowa, to Wisconsin, and you will find large Amish, settlements and populations. So I think that's going to be the direction that they're going to go. Wherever land becomes available, they're going to move to.
Okay, wow. So can you talk to me a little bit about how they're educated? I had always heard, they stop at 8th grade, that they're in one-room schoolhouses, and I find this all to be really interesting.
So that's all true. The one thing that we have to remember about the Amish is that in their faith system, they say that we are not of this world, but we are in it.
Oh, okay.
So, their mindset is that we are here, but we're not part of it. We're doing our thing with the end goal, of course, being salvation and going on to the New Jerusalem beyond. So that's why a lot of the things that they don't accept the outside world, because they're not part of this world. They don't want to be part of this world. That's why they dress the way that they do. That's why they make all the decisions that they do, or the vast majority of their decisions. Education's the same way. All Amish children, boys and girls, will attend a one-room schoolhouse, usually within walking distance of wherever they grew up. So in each district, depending how big the district is, there might be 2 or 3 schoolhouses, maybe just one. And it's usually taught by a woman, but it's an Amish woman. And it's a basic education, starting in 1st grade, and they go till 8th grade, so 7 years or 8 years of education. Reading, writing, some basic math. And they'll also learn a little bit of standard German for the purpose of the Bible. They use Luther's Bible in standard German, which is always funny because most Amish never speak standard German. But that's the Bible that they use. So when they go to worship service, they will hear, when there's a reading out of the Bible, it'll be in standard German. So they get that little bit of a basic education in that as well in the one-room schoolhouse, so that they have a little bit of a better understanding in church. But beyond that, the majority of the actual school lessons are instructed in both a mixture of English and Pennsylvania Dutch. And that depends where you are, too. It could vary. But it's basic, reading, writing, math, the traditional 3 R's, as we used to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And do they treat their male students different from their female students? They're all together?
It's all together. They're all in the same room. All age groups together. So the younger kids sit up front. The older kids are sitting towards the back.
Wow.
Just like it used to be here.
Right.
70 years ago, my grandparents both went to one-room schoolhouses, and it was the exact same way.
Right.
Boys and girls together, young kids sat in the front, the older kids sat in the back, and the older children help the younger children. It's truly a community learning. And that's the one big thing we have to remember about the Amish. The Amish are a community, and the community works together to help each other.
Right. Wow, that's okay. You really help frame it for me that they're not a part of the world. They're living within the world.
They're in it, but they're not part of it.
Yeah, that's that frames it well.
Yeah, it does. I think so too. That helps.
Yeah. So speaking of schools, our taxes go toward, public schooling and a whole bunch of other things. But so if they're not using our school system, and they've just got this whole different way of living, do they pay taxes?
So this could vary from state to state. I can't speak for sure about how it is in like Wisconsin, but I know here in Pennsylvania, at least, the Amish pay taxes. I think that's a common myth that they don't. Oh, they're rich, they don't pay taxes. They pay property taxes because they own land. They have to. And they pay other federal and local taxes too, like what's collected for roads and so forth. But they don't pay Social Security tax. And because of that, they don't get Social Security.
Right.
So when they get to 65, they are not getting that monthly check from the government because they didn't pay into the system. So that's one thing that they don't pay. But all other local and state taxes, they are completely, have to pay. Sales tax, county tax, township tax, property taxes.
Right.
So yeah, but like for example, property taxes drive public education in Pennsylvania. They're paying that and then not getting anything for it.
Right.
But that's just the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you were talking about taxes, it made me think of healthcare. So do they have their own doctors? Do they use ours?
That's another thing I think is changing more and more. Years ago, the Amish would not really participate in our tradition, in our healthcare system, but that's changing. However, they don't have health insurance. So, or most of them don't. Again, it's the community pays. So if a member of the community gets really sick, let's say they get cancer and needs treatment, the community will come together to pay for that treatment. Now they'll go, and we're seeing more and more Amish now going to our hospitals, to our doctors' clinics, and getting service, getting medical attention. That's a newer concept, I think, for a lot of us to see who aren't Amish, that we're seeing, Amish in in a clinic or in a hospital. But again, that's all funded out of pocket by the community, by the Amish community. And I don't know where that's going to go. Traditionally the Amish were very big on traditional medicine. So, using plants and herbs and using traditional remedies when you got sick, which had its pluses and its minuses. Sometimes they work, a lot of times they might not. Another thing, the Amish don't vaccinate their children. So there's certain things that they do and they don't allow.
Okay.
If it's a life-needing emergency operation, then it's usually, absolutely do it. But certain things then aren't allowed within the community too.
Okay, so that now I understand why I went to an Amish grocery store the other day and I saw these bags of little treats for sale, and it said, this will help someone suffering from leukemia. So that was maybe like the community coming together to try to raise money.
And I mean, there are a lot of plants and herbs that do have medicinal purposes. That a lot of those ideas were brought from Europe in the 1600s, and they're continuing that use where a lot of Americans, although it's becoming popular again.
Right.
So, it's like cyclical in that sense.
Right.
But yeah, the Amish still used a lot of those traditional medicines as well, but they are becoming more and more accepting of modern medicine, I guess we could say.
Okay.
But one of the things that draws it back is that, for those of you that aren't American watching this, our healthcare system is rather expensive, and that is naturally a hindrance for some of them. I mean, if you need a certain operation that costs $100,000, which it might, that community might not have that money.
Right.
So, things like that.
But when I saw leukemia, I was like, oh my goodness,
that's serious.
That's a tall order.
Yeah,
I don't know if they're going to be able to make enough money for that. So.
Right.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay. So do they hunt? Hunting is like a really popular thing here.
Yeah, absolutely. They hunt and fish, and they're required to follow all the same laws that we who are in Amish. They have to buy a hunting license, etc. Absolutely. Hunting's a huge part of their culture as well. Mainly for the meat. I mean, they do it for the real reasons, I guess you could say. Fishing as well. In fact, I belong to a hunting camp here in central Pennsylvania, and I walked past 3 Amish that were hunting really close to my tree stand this year that I had to tell them to, hey, move along. But they do hunt. Yeah, and they own guns. Absolutely.
Right. Okay, great. And kind of along this idea of using firearms, how do they feel about military service? So, like, if there was a draft, or how does that work?
Well,
with
one of the main tenets of the Amish faith and of all of the sectarian groups is that they are pacifists.
Right.
That was one of the reasons. That was another reason that got them in trouble back in Europe, because they refused to fight. In fact, small side note: the Amish men have beards when they're married. They start growing a beard, but they never grow a mustache. Never.
Right.
And there's a reason for that, and it's kind of a cool little tidbit in history. So when the Amish were first created, and that church was first created in the 1600s, the sign of a soldier at that time period was to have a mustache. When you look at images in that history, those, once you got into the military, then you usually grew a mustache.
Right.
That was their direct saying, no, we won't grow a mustache, and that's why they don't grow a mustache. I mean, that's not the case anymore. You have to grow a mustache to be in the army, but it was the prevailing sentiment at the time.
Wow.
So they,
it's
300 years.
symbolic,
Yeah, it is symbolic.
Oh, that's fascinating. I just thought maybe they didn't want to have lip hair.
No, maybe that too, but there is an underlying reason for it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yep. Okay, so if we have I forget what it's called, but the thing that you have to sign when you're a male at age 18.
Oh yeah.
So they wouldn't sign that.
No,
voluntary
absolutely
service.
not. Yeah,
something.
no, absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
What are their clothes like? So you talked especially about them hunting. I'm very curious what they wear hunting.
They wear their normal clothes and then just put an orange vest over top of it usually.
Okay.
So their clothing is plain colors, and that speaks to their faith. And it also is a symbol showing you that they aren't part of normal society. Black is a traditional color, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of them. Women wear dresses. And they can get a little more colorful, but it's usually a plain color. It's not like a floral print or something like that. When they go to church on a Sunday, everything is just black and white, no colors other than that. For the men, black pants, black coat, white shirt, no tie, anything like that. Very plain again. And then it also depends on how conservative or how liberal your group is. The really, really ultra-conservative, ultra-orthodox Amish won't even use buttons.
Okay.
They'll use everything is closed with pins, like straight pins.
Right.
Which is crazy for us to think about. But no, a button was a sign of wealth in the 1700s. It was a sign of the outward world. So they didn't want that, so they used pins, which you can't see when
Okay.
it's tucked into the clothes. But more liberal Amish, you will see them have buttons. So it just depends, again, which group you're in. But for the most part, no matter how liberal or how progressive, their dress is much plainer than what we have, what we would wear today.
Okay. And the women, they always have their hair up.
They almost
with
always have
bonnets.
their hair cut, and a head covering of some kind. Just like the men always have a hat on.
Right.
Now, maybe there's something biblical for that. I don't know. I just know that that's always been part of their faith practice.
What kind of holidays do they celebrate? Or
They celebrate, the majority of their year is based on the religious year. So they'll celebrate all of the major Christian holidays like Christmas and Easter, of course. Those are major holidays in their faith. But things like the 4th of July,
Right.
or Memorial Day or Labor Day,
Right.
they're not celebrating those like we would. Halloween, really not so much either.
Right.
The next day after Halloween, All Saints Day, is a much more important day for the Amish, having the Christian background principles to it. And then they celebrate things like Ascension Day, which even most Christian Americans don't necessarily celebrate, but they do. That's a day that they won't work. That's a day that is a family gathering day. So their calendar of holidays follows the Christian calendar more than anything else.
okay.
But at Christmas, they will exchange gifts and maybe not on the same scale that we do.
Right.
But they celebrate Christmas, of course, because
Okay.
Christian holiday.
Right, of course. So you mentioned earlier that the men will have beards if they're married, which makes me wonder, like, how do they go about dating in such a community like this?
Well, it's always understood that you marry within the group. And again, this might vary from group to group. I've never heard too much of like arranged marriages or anything like that. So, as a boy going to the one-room schoolhouse, hopefully there's a girl there that catches your eye.
Right.
But as far as like being forced to date a certain girl or a certain boy, that necessarily, it might happen in some places, but I don't think that's the norm by any stretch of the imagination. You are free to choose whoever you want to date or marry, but the expectation is that you marry within the church, or if you're going to marry with, from outside of the church, whoever you marry joins the faith, because you can't have a divided house.
Right.
So if you choose to marry someone outside the faith and they don't convert, then you have to leave.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned leaving. What does that entail?
Yeah, so leaving means leaving completely. Another popular thing among non-Amish is when they hear about the Amish, so, shunning. Oh, we heard you shun
Right.
people. Well, they do. If you break an infraction within the faith, or if you're deemed to have done stuff that is wrong, the community and the leadership of the church have the right to shun you from the group. And when they shun you, you are gone. And you are not allowed to have any contact with the group, including your family.
Wow.
Now, if your family chooses to maintain contact, they could get in trouble for doing that, but I know that there are some that will still try to maintain some kind of contact, maybe through letters in the mail, but physically seeing each other is extremely difficult. And it's forbidden, because you've broken that covenant with the faith, therefore you are no longer part of that faith, and it's a clear divide.
Wow.
And there are a lot of Amish, I say a lot, but there are many Amish that decide they're going to leave. And this isn't the life for me. It's a choice. To be Amish, you eventually get to a point in your faith and in your life where you have to make a decision. That's the whole Rumspringa thing.
Right,
that
which
maybe-
we'll talk about in another video.
Perfect. I'll come back to that topic.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, like dating and marrying, that's a huge decision, because you have to, it has ramifications.
Right.
If you decide to go a different path than what you're supposed to go.
Okay. And with getting married, are there any special wedding traditions that
I think
they
one of the
have?
neatest things about, it's a typical wedding. They exchange rings, but in American culture, the father walks the bride down the aisle, and there's always kind of this sense of like giving the girl away, where the girl doesn't. It almost comes off like the girl doesn't have a say. Like, yes, I'm giving you permission to marry my daughter. But in the Amish faith, I think this is really neat. The groom and the bride walk down the aisle together at the beginning of the service. And I think that shows a little bit about how the Amish value both genders too. Women in the church and in life have a huge role, and symbolically to see them both walk down and that the dad isn't giving the girl away, I think that's a huge statement to say. And I don't know if that was a tradition that they brought over from the old world. I would probably, because almost everything they do is based off of that. But I always thought, as far as the wedding ceremony goes, I think that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
But it's a neat difference.
Very.
I think, too.
I mean, it's like they're coming into the marriage together.
Together, absolutely. This is a decision that we're making together, and we're equal in it.
Oh, how great. Okay.
Yep.
So not to put a damper on that,
Yeah.
but is there any such thing as divorce in the Amish community?
Yes. It's not easy, and again, it depends on the group that you're in. If it's a more conservative, Orthodox group, it's extremely difficult. In some of the more liberal and progressive ones, you can get a divorce in instances of like domestic abuse, which happens. I mean, that's the Amish aren't completely perfect.
Right, of course.
I think a lot of people give them that have that idea in their head, oh, that they're these saintly people. No, I mean they're bad Amish people too. You can file for a divorce that has to be granted through the church elders in most locations. But it happens. It doesn't happen often,
right?
But it does happen.
So how do you know so much about it? You talked a little bit about it in the introduction.
Yeah.
But
So I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, the same region where a lot of these groups first settled. My family came over in the late 1600s, early 1700s, but we were in that group of non-Amish, non-Mennonites. We were Lutherans that came over from the Rhineland-Pfalz, from Hessen, all different branches of my family, and settled here in colonial Pennsylvania. And we continued speaking our language, and we have for 300 years.
Wow.
So we're in that umbrella group. So just because of my background and then my academic background and some of my research, I've done a lot of studying among the Amish, of the Amish. We speak the same language, and just having contact with them and reading, a lot, because it isn't that easy. You can't just walk into an Amish community and say, hey, ask the questions that you're asking me.
Right.
Most Amish would never want to talk about these things,
right.
For a lot of reasons. Coming back to that, we're not of this place,
Right.
And so I think my one of my ins though with the Amish is I can speak their language, and if I go into one of their stores and I start speaking in Pennsylvania Dutch, it's all of a sudden like one of the barriers has been knocked down,
right.
And they're a lot more apt to speak to me because I am speaking their own language, and maybe I don't come in looking like just a normal tourist. Hey, can I take a picture of your kid?
Right.
Which some people try to do, which really annoys me. But I think that's one of the reasons that I've learned a lot about this topic, and we share cultural. We don't share religious beliefs, but we share cultural and linguistic beliefs. So.
Okay. And sorry, you brought up the picture thing, which I didn't even think to ask. So I've always heard the Amish don't like to be photographed or videoed because they believe it's stealing their soul. Which
another myth out there. So a common myth. No, it's not that they think that the camera's going to steal your soul. It has to do with one of the commandments is thou shalt not make a graven image. So creating an image in traditional faith is against the commandments.
Okay.
That's why they don't want it done.
So even drawings or...
Well, again, I think it all depends what group you're in.
Okay.
Because folk art the Amish practice folk art. When you go into, if you ever get the chance to go into their homes, if it's not a super, super ultra Orthodox group, you will see stuff on their walls. It's not like their houses are completely bare.
Right.
But you're not going to see a wall of family portraits. That you won't see.
Okay.
That's the main idea behind taking pictures. Also, I think they see it as an invasion of their privacy too.
Right. Right. Yeah, they make I think it's well known. I guess maybe if you've never seen the Amish before, but I've been told my whole life, they don't like having their photo taken and so on.
And that, it's not that the camera's going to steal their soul. Maybe there's some Amish that do believe that, but I think as a general statement, it all goes back to that thou shalt not make a graven image.
Right.
So.
Okay.
I think that's the basis of it.
Well, I think it's great that you are able to, like you said, they're very closed off. I wouldn't be able to interview an Amish, man or woman the way I'm interviewing you. Mm-hmm. And you're able to explain a bit about their culture and kind of bridge that gap there. That's great.
I think as long as we can tear down a lot of the myths that are out there, that's important.
Right.
In the end, they're humans just like us.
Right.
They have all the same emotions that we do. They just view the world and go about life differently than us,
right.
Which is nothing wrong with that.
Right, of course not.
Yeah.
All right, Doug, well, thank you so much for talking to me.
Pleasure was all mine.
It's great. I learned a lot. I thought I knew a little bit about the Amish, but you have really...
Yeah, and there's tons of stuff online if you want to learn more. And I'll make sure you guys get the links for it.
And Doug mentioned he's on YouTube as well, where he has a channel and he shares a lot about the language and some more cultural
and cultural
aspects.
stuff, and culture that's not Amish, that's Pennsylvania Dutch, which for the people living in the Pfalz and Hessen and the Rhine Valley, you'll see a lot of similarities.
Yeah, so I'll link his channel to the description below. Make sure that you check that out. And thank you so much to all of my patrons. You guys are great for supporting me and letting me do videos like this and educate people on the Pennsylvania Dutch.
That's what it's all about.
So thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! Doug agreed to do a few more videos with me about the Pennsylvania Dutch, so make sure that you watch out for those.